The dust at Forward Operating Base Iron Ridge tasted like copper and broken promises. It rose in ochre plumes, whipped into frenzy by the departing Blackhawk's rotors, coating every surface with a gritty film that worked its way into your teeth, your eyes, your soul. Captain Elena Voss stood alone on the makeshift landing pad, her single rucksack at her feet and a hard rifle case gripped in one gloved hand. The helicopter's departure left behind a vacuum of sound, quickly filled by the base's perpetual symphony of diesel generators, distant radio chatter, and the metallic clang of someone working on a Humvee. Her uniform was immaculate, the name tape reading Voss in crisp black thread. The insignia on her collar identified her as a senior airman, a convenient fiction for a very inconvenient assignment. You, the translator. The voice cut through the noise like a rusty blade. Voss turned slowly, her expression neutral, cataloging the man who'd spoken. Staff Sergeant Marcus Greer was a wall of muscle, wrapped in digital camouflage, built like he'd been assembled from spare tank parts. His jaw worked rhythmically on a wad of chewing tobacco, and his eyes held the particular brand of contempt reserved for outsiders, academics, and anyone he perceived as dead weight. Those eyes traveled over her now, lingering on her clean uniform, the way her dark auburn hair was pinned in a regulation bun, the slender build that seemed comically inadequate for the 40 pounds of body armor she wore. Senior Airman Voss, she confirmed, her voice flat as Kansas. Right. Translator? He spat a brown stream that landed inches from her boot, a territorial marking disguised as habit. Figured. You look like you should be teaching kindergarten, not humping through the Korengal. Name's Greer. Lucky me I get to play nursemaid to the help. He jerked his head toward a cluster of sand-colored containers in the distance. Barracks are that way. Try not to trip over your own feet. Voss shouldered her gear without comment and followed. The men of 3rd Platoon, Charlie Company, were scattered around their quarters like feral cats in the sun, cleaning weapons, playing cards, sleeping off the weight of too many patrols. Conversations died as she approached, replaced by the particular silence of men sizing up a newcomer. Gentlemen, feast your eyes. Greer's voice boomed with theatrical cruelty. Command in their infinite wisdom has blessed us with a goddamn Rosetta Stone. Try not to use big words around her. Might confuse the poor girl. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. A wiry private named Hayes nudged his neighbor, whispering something that prompted another chuckle. Voss's gaze swept across them with the detachment of a scientist observing specimens. She noted the relaxed discipline, the way they held their weapons, the general air of battle-worn arrogance. They were survivors of this valley's violence, and she was the interloper, the fresh meat, the soft target who didn't belong in their hardened world. Dump your stuff in here, Greer said, gesturing to an empty bunk in a container that smelled of sweat, gunpowder, and stale testosterone. Briefing with Lieutenant Colonel Preston in 15. Don't be late. He despises it when support personnel waste his time. Voss placed her rucksack on the thin mattress and began unstrapping the rifle case. Greer leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk carved into his weathered face like graffiti on a monument. What you got in there, Airman? A thesaurus? His tone dripped with mockery. She didn't rise to the bait. Her fingers worked the latches with mechanical precision. The case opened to reveal not books, but the disassembled components of an SR-25 precision rifle. Each piece cradled in custom-cut foam. It was a weapon system issued to designated marksmen, not translators. Greer's smirk flickered. Fancy hardware for someone who pushes papers. It's what I was issued, Voss replied, her hands moving with the fluidity of muscle memory as she began assembling the weapon. Each piece locked into place with satisfying mechanical clicks. The heavy barrel, the Leopold scope, the sound suppressor. It was an intimate process, practiced 10,000 times until it became prayer. The men outside had gone quiet, their attention drawn by the unexpected competence. You even know which end the bullets come out of, sweetheart? Greer pressed, though his voice had lost some of its edge. Voss locked the bolt carrier group with a sharp, definitive clack. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Her gaze was the color of winter smoke, and it held absolutely nothing. No anger, no defensiveness, no fear. Just a flat, impenetrable calm. Yes, Staff Sergeant, I do. The absence of emotion in her response seemed to disturb him more than any witty comeback could have. He grunted, pushing off the doorframe. Whatever. Briefing room. 5 minutes. Move it. He strode away, authority reasserted through volume and swagger. Voss finished the assembly, ran a quick function check, and set the rifle carefully on her bunk. She closed her eyes, breathing in the metallic air, letting the familiar ritual of humiliation wash over her like dirty water. This was always the first test, the test of patience, the slow grind of being underestimated. It was a form of camouflage she'd learned to wear as naturally as her body armor. The briefing room was a plywood construction humming with the exhausted effort of a single, overworked air conditioning unit. Lieutenant Colonel Preston stood before a digital map of the Charcot Valley, his posture radiating the rigid impatience of a career infantry officer who believed wars were won through aggressive action and overwhelming firepower, not subtlety. Beside him stood Lieutenant Alvarez, 3rd Platoon's young leader, trying desperately to project confidence he hadn't yet earned. The platoon filled the cramped space, Greer taking position near the front, like the alpha predator he believed himself to be. Voss found a spot in the back, standing, observing, invisible. Listen up, Preston's voice could strip paint. Intelligence indicates insurgent forces have established a new supply route through the Takur Pass. It's barely a go trail, but they're moving fighters and munitions through it to support attacks in the lowlands. High Command wants confirmation. Pattern of life, numbers, equipment, before we commit resources to shutting it down. He tapped the map, indicating a red line snaking through treacherous mountain terrain. 3rd Platoon, congratulations. You'll insert by Little Bird at this LZ. His finger struck a relatively flat area. Then you hump on foot to Observation Post Delta, here. The second location was deep in hostile territory, surrounded by ridge lines that could hide a battalion. It's a 4-day mission. 2 days observation, 1 day extraction buffer. Questions? Lieutenant Alvarez cleared his throat nervously. Sir, support package? You've got your medic and your RTO. Air support is on standby, but weather in those mountains is unpredictable, and response time could be 30-plus minutes. For all practical purposes, you're alone. Travel light, travel fast, and do not be compromised. This is reconnaissance, not a firefight. Preston's eyes scanned the room and landed on Voss in the back. His expression curdled like milk left in the sun. Lieutenant. A word. He pulled Alvarez aside, lowering his voice just enough to create the illusion of privacy. Why is she here? She's attached to us for the mission, sir, Alvarez said, flustered. Senior Airman Voss. Linguist. Orders came from Bagram. A linguist. Preston's tone made it sound like an obscenity. To translate what, exactly? Mountain wind? This is a combat zone, Alvarez, not a classroom. I need riflemen, not academics. Keep her out of the way. Make sure she doesn't get anyone killed. Greer, positioned close enough to hear every word, couldn't suppress the satisfied smile that spread across his face. He glanced back at Voss, expecting to see hurt, embarrassment, anger, something. Her face betrayed nothing. She might as well have been carved from stone. The briefing concluded, and the platoon filed out to make final preparations. Greer made a point of shouldering past Voss hard enough to make her shift her footing. You heard the colonel, Airman. Stay out of the way. Your job is to be quiet and not get underfoot. Think your fancy education prepared you for that? Private Hayes and Corporal Russo, standing nearby, looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. They were followers by nature, and Greer was unquestionably the pack leader. Voss simply adjusted her pack straps, the weight settling across her shoulders with practiced ease. I'll manage, Staff Sergeant. Good. Now make yourself useful and top off everyone's water. That's a nice, simple task even you can handle. He dropped an empty canteen at her feet with a hollow clatter. Hop to it, princess. Without a word, Voss bent down, picked up the canteen, and walked toward the water point. She collected the others, her movements deliberate and unhurried. There was no anger in her bearing, only a deep, oceanic calm. She was a river stone, letting the current of their contempt flow over her, feeling its force and direction, but remaining fundamentally unmoved. She filled each canteen methodically, the gurgle of water a soothing counterpoint to the harsh sounds of the base. This was the ritual she knew, the hazing, the testing, the necessary humiliation before respect could be earned. She had danced this particular dance a dozen times in a dozen different theaters, and she knew with absolute certainty how it would end. The flight in was an exercise in controlled chaos. Two MH6 little birds skimmed the earth at suicidal speeds, following the train's contours like they were welded to it. The mountains rose around them like ancient, hostile gods, their peaks lost in gray cloud cover. Voss sat wedged between Rousseau and the platoon medic, a competent specialist named Chen. She watched the landscape blur past, her eyes not just seeing but analyzing, noting natural choke points, likely ambush positions, avenues of approach and retreat. Her mind was a tactical computer overlaying probabilities onto raw geography. In the lee bird, Greer was shouting into his headset, his voice crackling with false bravado. Hope the professor brought her motion sickness pills. This ain't exactly a classroom. Voss didn't respond. Her focus was absolute. They touched down in a maelstrom of dust and withered grass, the LZ a tiny exposed shelf of stone at 7,800 feet. Within 30 seconds, the helicopters were gone, their sound swallowed by the immense, crushing silence of the high peaks. The air was thin and cold, biting at exposed skin like invisible teeth. Lieutenant Alvarez, looking pale and out of his depth, checked his GPS with trembling hands. All right, people. OP Delta is 7 clicks northeast. Single file, 5-meter dispersion. Greer, you're on point. Daniels, rear security. Sergeant Daniels, the platoon sergeant, a quiet, competent man with deep lines around his eyes, nodded crisply. You heard the LT. Let's move. Greer chambered around with unnecessary aggression and started moving at a punishing pace. The platoon fell in behind him. Alvarez positioned Voss in the middle of the formation, just behind him and the radio operator. Stay close, airman, he said, his voice tight with anxiety. Just stay close. The march was brutal. The so-called trail was little more than a suggestion carved into loose scree and unstable rock. The altitude clawed at their lungs with invisible talons. Within an hour, the men were gasping, sweat soaking through their uniforms despite the cold. Voss moved with steady, metronomic precision. Her breathing was deep and controlled, her steps placed with deliberate care. She carried the same weight as the others, but it sat differently on her frame, distributed through core strength and perfect balance. While younger soldiers like Rousseau stumbled, their movements growing sloppy with fatigue, she remained fluid, efficient. Greer, on point, set a deliberately punishing pace, as if trying to break her. He'd stop periodically, looking back with a sneer as the others struggled. His eyes always found Voss. Having fun yet, princess? This ain't a nature hike. She would meet his gaze with that same unreadable calm and continue her steady ascent. Her lack of reaction was its own weapon, and it was eating at him. After 3 hours, Alvarez called a halt in the lee of a rock outcropping. Men collapsed, gasping for air, tearing at their canteens. Check in, Alvarez panted into his radio. Point is good, Greer's voice came back, annoyingly fresh. Just waiting on the stragglers. Voss didn't sit. She stood, scanning their back trail, her SR-25 held in a low, ready position. Her eyes moved slowly, methodically, dissecting the terrain they just crossed. Greer swaggered back down the line. What's wrong, airman? Too good to rest with us lowly grunts. Maintaining security, she said quietly, not looking at him. Her focus was on a distant ridgeline. Daniels has rear security, Greer snapped. Your job is to carry water and translate ghost stories when we finally meet a local. Relax. Something's wrong, Voss said, her voice quiet but firm. Greer laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Oh, here we go. The bookworm has a feeling. You hear that, Hayes? The new girl's getting spooked. Hayes forced a weak smile. Rousseau just looked away, drinking deeply from his canteen. The silence, Voss continued, her eyes still on the ridge. It's unnatural. No birds, no wind sound. We're being watched. It's called altitude, genius, Greer retorted. Things get quiet up here. Now stand down before you give the LT an aneurysm. Sergeant Daniels moved up to her position, his expression serious. Unlike Greer, Daniels judged people by their actions, not their reputation. He looked where she was looking. What do you see, airman? He asked respectfully. I don't see anything, she admitted. That's what worries me. This terrain is perfect for an OP. If we can see them, they can see us. We've been moving for 3 hours on a predictable route. Before Daniels could respond, the world exploded. The IED detonated with a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, a concussive wave that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't a mortar or RPG. It was a command-detonated charge placed with surgical precision on the trail just ahead of Greer's position. The blast threw him backward like a child's toy, his rifle spinning away into the void. Simultaneously, machine gun fire erupted from the ridge Voss had been watching. A second gun opened up from a flanking position to their left, creating a perfect L-shaped ambush. Chaos. Bullets stitched across the rocks, kicking up stone fragments that flew like shrapnel. "Contact right! Contact left!" someone screamed. Lieutenant Alvarez, reacting on pure instinct, raised his rifle. A single high-velocity round punched through his shoulder, spinning him like a top and dropping him hard. Chen, the medic, scrambled toward him, crawling through the bullet storm. Sergeant Daniels shoved Voss down behind a low rock wall. "Get your head down!" He brought his own weapon up, firing controlled bursts toward the ridge position. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A stream of tracer fire converged on his location. Voss saw the round's impact, saw his body jerk violently, his helmet flying off. He collapsed without making a sound. 10 seconds. That's how long it took for the platoon's command structure to disintegrate. The lieutenant was down, screaming. The platoon sergeant was dead. Panic spread like wildfire. Rousseau fired wildly, his rounds impacting uselessly high on the ridge. Hayes was frozen, face white with terror, huddled behind a boulder. The radio operator screamed that his set was dead, jammed, nothing but static. Greer was alive but dazed, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, his rifle lost. He fumbled for his sidearm, eyes wide with shock. His swagger had evaporated, replaced by raw, animal fear. "Get fire down! Where are they? Somebody do something!" His voice cracked. He was a leader in name only, his authority shattered by the first shock of real violence. Amid the cacophony of gunfire, screams, and the acrid stench of cordite, Voss was an island of crystalline calm. The initial shock wave of the ambush passed through her like water through a sieve, and something else took over. Something carved from years of training in places that didn't officially exist. Her mind wasn't racing. It was focusing, processing tactical data at impossible speed. L-shaped ambush. Primary machine gun 12 o'clock, secondary 9 o'clock. High ground advantage. Predetermined kill zone. Communications jammed. Leadership neutralized. Unit cohesion collapsing. She moved. Not frantically, but with terrifying deliberation. She low-crawled to Lieutenant Alvarez, ignoring the rounds snapping over her head. Chen was trying to apply a tourniquet, his hands shaking violently. "Give me that!" Voss's voice cut through his panic like a scalpel. It wasn't a request. She took the tourniquet, her hands a blur of practiced motion, cinching it high and tight on the lieutenant's arm. "Pressure point, femoral artery. Here." She pressed her fingers into the wounded officer's groin, and the arterial spray from his shoulder slowed to a seep. "Hold that pressure. He needs plasma. Now." Chen, shocked into compliance by her sheer competence, fumbled in his aid bag. Voss was already moving again. She crawled to Sergeant Daniels' still body, a grim necessity. She didn't pause for sentiment. She took his radio handset, his spare magazines, the small digital binoculars hanging around his neck. She crawled back to a position offering marginal cover, a shallow depression behind a granite slab. The secondary machine gun at their 9 o'clock was the immediate threat, chewing up their flank, preventing any movement. She could hear the distinct chatter of a PKM, its lower rate of fire a familiar, deadly rhythm. She also heard something else, faint, distorted voices over the captured handset. It wasn't completely jammed. It was being overpowered. Through the static, she made out fragments of speech. The dialect was Pashto, but a specific regional variant from the Waziristan borderlands, a dialect she knew intimately. "Hold them there." "The flankers are almost in position." They weren't just pinning them, they were encircling them. She turned to Greer, who was still huddled near the blast crater, his face ashen. "Staff Sergeant." Her voice was unrecognizable. The quiet, passive airman was gone, replaced by someone else entirely, someone with a voice forged in fire. Greer flinched, his eyes finding hers. He saw not a translator, not a woman he'd been mocking, but a predator. The machine gun on the left flank, she stated, pointing with her chin. I need it suppressed. You, Russo, Hayes, put every round you have on that position. Do not stop firing until I tell you. For a second, Greer hesitated, his shattered ego warring with his survival instinct. Who the hell do you think? Voss's gaze was utterly devoid of empathy. I'm the one who's going to keep you alive. Fire, or we all die here. Something in her eyes broke him, the certainty, the absolute lack of fear. He scrambled for a fallen rifle. You heard her, he screamed at the others, his voice cracking. Fire on the left! Fire! It was a cascade. Russo and Hayes, desperate for any direction, obeyed. They laid down a ragged but consistent stream of fire toward the PKM nest. The volume of enemy fire from that position lessened immediately as the gunners ducked for cover. It was the window she needed. Voss slithered to the edge of her cover, the SR-25 moving with her like an extension of her body. She laid the rifle on the rock, its bipod providing a stable platform. She brought the scope to her eye, her breathing slowing, her heartbeat a steady metronome. The world narrowed to the circle of glass. She ignored the main gun on the ridge. That was the bait. The flanker was the real threat. She scanned the jumble of rocks and scrub at 9 o'clock. The muzzle flashes had given her a general location. Now she needed a target. Patience. Breathe out. Relax. The mantra was automatic. A flicker of movement. A gunner, emboldened by the lull, raised his head to reacquire his target. 620 meters out. A difficult shot under perfect conditions. These were not perfect conditions. Voss's mind did the math without conscious thought. Distance, 620 meters. Wind, negligible in the gully. Maybe 5 miles per hour left to right at his position. Uphill angle, 15 degrees. Barometric pressure low. Altitude compensation required. She made a minute adjustment to her scope's elevation dial. One smooth, controlled breath out. The crosshairs settled on the space just above the man's visible head, leading the target, accounting for bullet drop. At the bottom of her exhale, in the silent space between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger. The SR-25 bucked against her shoulder, a deep, resonant thump. The suppressor swallowed the worst of the sound. She was already working the bolt, her eye never leaving the scope. She saw the round arrive before she heard the impact. The enemy gunner's head snapped back, a pink mist vaporizing in the cold mountain air. The PKM fell silent. Target down, she said, her voice a flat monotone. Shift fire to 12 o'clock. Short, controlled bursts. Conserve ammo. Greer, Hayes, and Russo stared in her direction, mouths agape. They hadn't seen the shot, but they saw the result. The terrifying stream of fire from their left was simply gone, as if she'd erased it with a word. How? Greer started. Less talking, more shooting, Staff Sergeant. She cut him off, her eyes still glued to the scope. She was scanning for the second gunner, the spotter. They always worked in pairs. There, a flash of reflected light off a lens. A careless mistake. Another breath. Another impossibly calm calculation. Another suppressed thump. Another body slumped out of sight. The immediate pressure evaporated. The battlefield wasn't safe, but it was survivable. Voss crawled back from the ledge. Chen, status on the LT. Stable for now, the medic replied, his voice filled with newfound respect. But he's lost a lot of blood. We need extraction. We're not getting out the way we came in, Voss stated. They'll have that trail zeroed and covered. The flankers are still coming. She listened to the handset again. The enemy commander was angry, shouting orders to push forward, to finish them. Radio operator, she said to the terrified soldier huddled with his useless equipment. Give me the set. He practically threw it at her. She ripped out the standard handset and began digging in her pack. She pulled out a small, coiled antenna and a compact, encrypted data burst device. The men watched as she began reconfiguring the radio, her fingers flying across keypad and connection ports. What are you doing? Hayes asked, his voice barely a whisper. They're jamming everything. They're jamming conventional frequencies, Voss said, not looking up. They're not jamming this. She finished the connections and began typing a rapid sequence of characters onto the device's small keyboard. It was a complex encryption key, entered from memory. Greer had crawled closer, his earlier antagonism replaced by stunned, fearful curiosity. He watched her fingers move. He saw the screen flicker to life, bypassing standard boot-up protocols and going straight to a secure military portal. Prompt: Enter command authenticate. Voss typed another, even longer string of characters, her face illuminated by the green glow. The system seemed to hang. Then new text flashed across the display. Access granted. Welcome. ID, Wraith. Rank, Major. Unit, JSOC, Task Force Apollo. Clearance, Zulu Black. Greer's blood ran cold. The letters on the screen burned into his brain like a brand. Major. Not Senior Airman. Major. He didn't recognize the specific unit designation, but JSOC was unmistakable. Joint Special Operations Command. The tip of the spear. The people who didn't officially exist. And the call sign. Wraith. It was a legend, whispered in smoke pits and ready rooms from Kandahar to Mogadishu. A name associated with impossible missions, surgical strikes, and the quiet dismantling of terror networks. Some said Wraith was a teen. Others said it was one person, a ghost who could appear anywhere and kill from any distance. No one knew if Wraith was male or female. They were just a myth, a boogeyman the enemy feared and friendly forces revered. And she was right here, covered in dirt and Sergeant Daniels' blood, holding a radio that connected her to the highest, most classified echelons of the military. The woman he'd called Princess. The woman he'd ordered to fill canteens. The entire universe of Staff Sergeant Marcus Greer's understanding tilted on its axis and shattered. A wave of nausea washed over him, a vertigo born of rank and reality colliding. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not an airman, but a figure of immense, terrifying authority. The quiet patience wasn't passivity, it was control. The silence wasn't weakness, it was assessment. Every dismissive word, every sneer, every petty humiliation flashed through his mind like tracer fire. He wasn't just an idiot. He'd been mocking a living legend. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Voss ignored him. She was already composing a message on the data burst device, written in compressed tactical shorthand that only another operator would understand. CCO3, PLT ambushed. PSN 34.716988. KIA1/WIA2 /LDRSHP null. Enemy EST18-25 /coord/comms jammed. Hostile QRF inbound. Rec immediate kinetic support. Danger close. Rec exfil assets. Advise. She hit send. The message compressed into a microsecond burst of encrypted data and shot upward, punching through the enemy jamming to a satellite in high orbit. Seconds later, a response blinked back. Wraith. Solid copy standby. Assets spinning up. Spectre en route. ETA 14. Mics. Hold fast. Spectre. An AC-130 gunship. 14 minutes. An eternity. Voss disconnected her device. Gunship is inbound, she announced to the shattered platoon. We need to hold for 14 minutes. She turned her attention to Greer, her eyes like chips of winter ice. Staff Sergeant, get a grip. I need you. Give me a count. Ammo, water, personnel status. Greer flinched as if struck. The casual use of his rank from her now felt like a physical blow. He snapped his body into something resembling a position of attention, even while lying on the ground. Yes, ma'am, he croaked, the word foreign and clumsy in his mouth. Ma'am? Rousseau whispered, eyes wide. Greer didn't have to explain. The shift in his entire demeanor was explanation enough. He started crawling to the other survivors, his movements no longer swaggering but desperate and subservient. Hayes, you're with me, Voss commanded. We're moving the lieutenant. That open ground is a coffin. She and Hayes, who now looked at her as if she were a deity, carefully dragged the groaning Lieutenant Alvarez behind a larger, more defensible cluster of boulders. Chen followed, clutching his aid bag. Voss surveyed their new position. It was a natural fortress of granite. Russo, set up here. You have a lane of fire covering northeast approach. Greer, that rock, you cover west. Fire only on my command. Make every shot count. She laid out their defense with the calm precision of an architect drawing blueprints. She positioned them not just for cover, but for interlocking fields of fire. She pointed out landmarks, assigned sectors of responsibility. The panic that had gripped the platoon was replaced by fragile, desperate purpose, all of it flowing directly from her. The enemy, sensing a shift, began to press their advantage. Figures moved down from the ridge, darting between rocks, closing distance. They were no longer content to pin them. They were coming to finish it. Hold, Voss whispered into the radio handset, now linked to the soldiers' earpieces. Let them close. Don't waste the shot. Her rifle was up, her eye back in the scope. She was the anchor. The others were extensions of her will. The insurgents were 200 meters away now, moving with confidence. The lead fighter, carrying an RPG, broke cover to get a clear shot. Greer, target 200 meters, 11 o'clock. Voss's voice was calm in his ear. Greer sighted his rifle, hands shaking. He saw the man with the RPG. He took a breath, trying to mimic the calm he'd seen in her. He squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide. The RPG gunner dropped to a knee, aiming. Thump from Voss's position. A single round crossed the distance. The insurgent's chest erupted. The RPG launcher clattered to the rocks. Control your breathing, Staff Sergeant, she said, her voice betraying no disappointment. Russo, you have two moving through the washout on your right. This time, Russo's burst was controlled. One figure dropped, the other scrambled for cover. They were holding. Barely, but they were holding. For 12 minutes, she directed their fire, calling targets with preternatural awareness. She fired her own rifle only 6 more times. Each time, a key enemy threat, a machine gunner, a grenadier, a squad leader, was eliminated. The enemy's confidence wavered. Their assault faltered. They'd expected to roll up a panicked, leaderless group of soldiers. Instead, they'd run into a coordinated, lethal defense that seemed to anticipate their every move. Then they heard it. Not the familiar whoomp, whoomp of a Blackhawk or the scream of a jet. It was a low, deep drone that grew steadily louder, a sound that promised biblical retribution. The sound of an AC-130 gunship. The angel of death circling high above. Spectre is on station, Voss said. Get ready to move. She pulled a small infrared strobe from her pouch and clicked it on. Its pulsing flash invisible to the naked eye, but a brilliant beacon to the gunship's thermal imagers. On the radio, a new voice. Calm. Folksy. Wraith, this is Spectre 06. We see your strobe. Got a whole mess of bad guys playing whack-a-mole down there with you. You want us to make it rain? Affirmative, Spectre, Voss replied, her voice still impossibly level. Danger close. We are marked by strobe. Everything 100 meters out from north to southeast is hostile. Fire for effect. A moment of silence. Then, copy that, Wraith. Tell your boys to keep their heads down. A low whistle built to a deafening roar. The 40mm Bofors cannon on the AC-130 opened up. The ground around their position erupted in a series of explosions, each one a geyser of rock and fire. The sound was physical, a concussion that vibrated through bone. The enemy assault dissolved instantly. What had been a coordinated attack became a desperate, panicked rout. The gunship's cannons, directed by an unseen hand in the sky, pursued them relentlessly. Spectre, good effects on target, Voss said calmly as the world tore itself apart around them. Exfil team on approach? That's affirmative, Wraith. 2 HH-60s are 6 minutes out. Popping smoke on your LZ now. A plume of green smoke appeared on the rocky shelf where they'd first landed, a place that now seemed a lifetime away. We need to move, Voss commanded. Greer, Russo, you carry the lieutenant. Hayes, you're on my 6. Chen, grab all medical gear. Go. The journey back to the LZ was a controlled, desperate rush. Greer and Russo grunting with effort, half-carried, half-dragged the semi-conscious Alvarez. Voss moved at the rear of their small group, her rifle sweeping their back trail, ensuring no one followed. The AC-130 continued to circle overhead, a guardian angel with cannons, suppressing any hint of remaining resistance. They reached the LZ just as two Pavehawk helicopters came into view, flying low and fast. They didn't land, just hovered a few feet off the ground, side doors open, gunners providing cover. The crew chief of the lead helicopter, a grizzled master sergeant, leaned out. He wasn't looking at Greer or the other soldiers. His eyes were locked on Voss. He saw the SR-25, the custom gear, the look in her eyes. He knew. "Get the wounded aboard," he yelled. Chen and Greer pushed Alvarez up into the cabin. Hayes and Russo scrambled in after him. Greer turned, his face a mess of dirt, blood, and sweat. He looked at Voss, still providing security, her body positioned between her soldiers and the mountains. He hesitated, then did the only thing that made sense in his shattered world. He snapped to the most rigid, formal position of attention he could manage. "Ma'am," he barked. Voss gave him a short, sharp nod. "Get in, Staff Sergeant." He climbed into the helicopter. Voss was the last to board. As she stepped into the cabin, the Master Sergeant crew chief gave her a slow, respectful nod. She returned it, then took a seat, rifle resting across her knees. The Pavehawk banked sharply and sped away from the mountain, leaving smoke and death behind. The flight back to Fob Iron Ridge was silent. The roar of the rotors was deafening, but the silence inside the cabin was heavier. Hayes and Russo stared at Voss, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. They were replaying the events, the impossible shots, the calm commands, the arrival of the gunship. They were putting the pieces together. Greer sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the floor of the aircraft. He couldn't bring himself to look at her. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than pack and armor combined. Every jeer, every insult, every condescending smirk was a hot coal in his memory. He hadn't just disrespected an officer. He'd disrespected a legend. And she'd saved his life, without a second thought, with the same dispassionate efficiency a mechanic might use to fix a broken engine. He was a problem to be solved, nothing more. The humiliation was absolute. When they landed, the base was already in a state of alert. A medical team was waiting to rush Lieutenant Alvarez to the aid station, but there was someone else waiting on the tarmac, standing ramrod straight as the helicopter's rotors spun down. Lieutenant Colonel Preston. He'd received the after-action report directly from JSOC Command. It was brief, heavily redacted, and utterly baffling. It spoke of a compromised mission, a platoon saved from annihilation, and a call sign he'd only ever heard of in classified briefings. Wraith. He'd come to meet the survivors, to see for himself. The ramp lowered. The battered soldiers of 3rd Platoon emerged, stumbling into the light. Preston's eyes scanned them, noting their exhaustion, their fear. Then he saw Voss. She was the last one off, moving with the same steady calm she'd had when she arrived. She was covered in dirt and dried blood, but she walked, not like a victim, but like a conqueror. Preston started to step forward, his mouth opening to demand an explanation. But before he could utter a sound, Greer did something that stopped him cold. Staff Sergeant Greer, ignoring his colonel completely, planted his feet, drew himself up to his full height, and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his life. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer force of the gesture. His eyes were locked on Voss. It was a salute of utter, unconditional submission and respect. One by one, Russo, Hayes, and Chen, seeing Greer's action, followed suit. They lined up, their bodies battered and aching, and rendered formal salutes to the airmen they'd dismissed just that morning. Colonel Preston froze, his mind struggling to process the scene. A staff sergeant, 2 privates, and a specialist medic, all saluting another airman. It was a complete breakdown of military protocol. It was insanity. And yet the looks on their faces, the raw, unambiguous reverence, told him this was no joke. He looked at Voss. She met his gaze, her dark eyes holding his for a long moment. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. In that silent exchange, Preston understood. The nonsensical report, the impossible survival of the platoon, the bizarre scene unfolding before him, it all clicked into place. He wasn't looking at a linguist. He was looking at someone who operated in a world far above his own. Someone who'd temporarily descended into his chain of command for reasons he would never be privy to. Slowly, deliberately, Voss raised her hand. It wasn't a salute. It was a simple, slight nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that said, "As you were." It was enough. Greer and the others dropped their salutes, though they remained standing at attention, eyes fixed on her. Voss walked past them, past the stunned colonel, and headed toward the nondescript container that served as her temporary quarters. She moved without a limp, without a hint of the ordeal she'd just endured. The base seemed to part for her, the usual noise and activity dimming in her wake. Later that night, long after the base had settled into the uneasy quiet of a wartime evening, Colonel Preston stood in the shadows near the barracks. He watched the light inside Voss's container. He couldn't bring himself to approach, to ask the questions burning in his mind. What was his part in this? A test? An evaluation? Was his command now under a microscope he hadn't even known existed? The door to the container opened. Voss stepped out into the cool night air. She was no longer in uniform. She wore simple gray fatigues and a t-shirt, her auburn hair unbound, falling over her shoulders. In her hands were a cleaning rod and a soft cloth. She sat on an empty ammo can outside her door, placed her SR-25 across her lap, and began to clean it under the dim yellow glow of a single security light. Her movements were ritual, slow, methodical, full of quiet reverence for the tool of her trade. She disassembled the weapon with the same precise grace she'd shown upon arrival. She wiped away the carbon and grime of the day's work, her expression serene, almost meditative. The rising moon cast long shadows across the fob, and in its pale light, Preston could see the faint silvery lines of old scars on her hands and forearms, a roadmap of a life he could barely imagine. She wasn't celebrating, she wasn't boasting, she was simply resetting. The mission was over. The point was made. Lives were saved. Now there was only the quiet, solitary work of preparing for the next one. Preston watched for a long time, a silent observer to a ritual of competence he now understood he'd been blind to. He had been dismissed in his own way, as thoroughly as she had been, and respect, hard and absolute, had been unequivocally earned. He finally turned and walked away, the image of the major, disguised as an airman, quietly cleaning her rifle under a hostile moon, burned forever into his memory. 3 days later. The administrative container that served as Fob Iron Ridge's command center smelled of coffee and paper. Staff Sergeant Marcus Greer stood at attention before Lieutenant Colonel Preston's desk, his uniform freshly pressed, his posture impeccable. The informal swagger that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something harder, more respectful. At ease, Staff Sergeant, Preston said, though his tone suggested this was anything but a casual conversation. Greer shifted to parade rest, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on a point above the colonel's head. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. I've read your after-action report, all of your after-action reports, actually. Yours, Russo's, Hayes's, Chen's. They all tell the same story, though I noticed certain creative omissions regarding chain of command. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You want to tell me what really happened up there? Greer's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, I told you what happened. We were ambushed. Senior Airman Voss. He stopped himself, the rank suddenly feeling like a lie in his mouth. She coordinated our defense, called in the gunship, got us out alive. That's what you wrote, yes. Preston tapped the report on his desk. What you didn't write is why a staff sergeant with 8 years of service deferred command to an E4 translator. Why you saluted her on the tarmac. Why every man in that platoon now looks at her like she's... He trailed off, searching for the right word. A legend, sir, Greer finished, quietly. Because she is. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the small window overlooking the base, hands clasped behind his back. I received a call yesterday from a colonel I've never heard of, from a unit that doesn't officially exist. He informed me that Senior Airman Voss's assignment here is concluded. She'll be departing tonight on a C-130 to Bagram, and from there to locations unknown. He turned back to Greer. He also informed me that everything related to her presence here is now classified. The mission reports will be redacted. Your platoon will receive commendations for exemplary performance under fire, but the specifics will remain vague. He paused. Do you understand what I am telling you, Staff Sergeant? Yes, sir, Greer said, his voice rough. She was never here. Officially, you were saved by excellent training, good luck, and fast air support, Preston continued. Unofficially, he looked at Greer with something approaching sympathy. Unofficially, you were saved by someone so far above our pay grade that we'll never fully understand what happened. Someone who chose to walk among us for reasons we'll never know. Greer swallowed hard. Sir, I need to apologize to her before she leaves. Preston's expression softened slightly. I imagine she doesn't need your apology, Staff Sergeant, but I suspect she'd appreciate the gesture. Dismissed. Greer found Voss where he'd found her that first day, outside her container, this time packing her gear with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. Her rucksack was half-loaded, her rifle case already sealed. She looked up as he approached, her expression neutral. Staff Sergeant, she said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. He stopped 3 paces away, came to attention, and rendered a salute that would have made a drill instructor weep. Ma'am, permission to speak freely. She straightened, returned the salute with equal precision, then gestured for him to continue. Go ahead. Greer dropped his salute but maintained his posture, every word carefully chosen. I was wrong, ma'am, not just about you, though God knows I was catastrophically wrong about you, but about what it means to lead, to serve. He took a breath. I thought I was a good NCO because I was tough, because I didn't take shit from anyone, especially people I thought were weak or didn't belong. His voice grew quieter. You showed me that real strength looks nothing like what I thought it did. Real leadership isn't about swagger or volume. It's about competence, control. Knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of and not needing anyone else's validation. Voss listened without interrupting, her dark eyes unreadable. I humiliated you, Greer continued, the words coming harder now. I was cruel. I treated you like you were beneath me, when the truth is... He shook his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. The truth is, I'm not worthy to carry your gear, ma'am, and I'm sorry. I'm profoundly, deeply sorry. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. A helicopter passed overhead, its rotors a distant thump, thump, thump. Somewhere on the base, someone was shouting cadence. Finally, Voss spoke, her voice carrying the same calm authority it had in the mountains. Staff Sergeant, do you know why I didn't respond to your provocations? Why I filled the canteens, accepted the insults, and stayed quiet? Because you're better than me, ma'am, Greer said simply. No. A hint of something, not quite a smile, but close, touched her lips. Because I've been doing this long enough to know that respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned. And it can only be earned when it matters. She paused. Up in those mountains, when everything went to hell, you listened. You followed orders from someone you'd been mocking hours earlier, because when it mattered, you chose survival over ego. That takes strength, Staff Sergeant. A different kind than you're used to, but strength nonetheless. Greer felt something loosen in his chest, though the shame remained. I still failed you, ma'am. You failed yourself, Voss corrected gently. But you also learned. That's more than most people manage. She returned to her packing, folding a shirt with precise, practiced movements. Take that lesson back to your platoon. Teach them what you learned. Lead them with competence, not just confidence. That's how you make this right. Yes, ma'am, Greer said, his voice thick. He hesitated, then added, Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why did you take this assignment? Someone like you. Why come here, to this nowhere fob, to be treated like... He stopped, unable to finish. Voss was quiet for a moment, considering her words. Because someone has to know what it's really like. The grind, the contempt, the constant underestimation that people face when they don't fit the expected mold. She looked at him directly. And because missions like the one we ran, they save lives. Not just the lives of the people in the platoon, but the lives those people will touch, the decisions they'll make, the soldiers they'll lead. She zipped her rucksack closed with a sharp, final sound. You'll remember what happened up there, Staff Sergeant, and one day you'll be in a position to decide whether someone different, someone unexpected, gets a chance to prove themselves. When that day comes, I hope you'll remember which choice saved your life. Greer stood speechless, the weight of her words settling over him like armor. She was right. He would remember. He would never forget. I will, ma'am. He finally managed. I swear it. Voss shouldered her pack, picked up her rifle case, and extended her hand. Then my work here is done. Greer took her hand, the handshake firm, respectful, equal. It was an honor, ma'am. A genuine honor. The honor was mine, Staff Sergeant. She released his hand and turned toward the waiting vehicle that would take her to the flight line. Then she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. One more thing. Ma'am, your men, Russo, Hayes, Chen, they look up to you. Don't waste that. Use it to build them up, not break them down. That's the difference between a leader and a bully. With that, she walked away, her boots crunching on the gravel, her silhouette framed against the setting sun. Greer watched her go, standing at attention until she disappeared into the vehicle. Even after it drove away, trailing dust in the amber light, he remained standing there, a statue of respect and revelation. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Greer stood in the FOB's briefing room, addressing a group of new arrivals fresh from stateside. Among them was a young specialist with thick glasses and a nervous demeanor, an intelligence analyst assigned to their company. The kid looked terrified, out of place, exactly the kind of soldier Greer would have once eaten alive. All right, listen up, Greer said, his voice carrying authority but lacking the cruel edge it once held. Some of you are combat veterans. Some of you are support personnel. Some of you have never heard a shot fired in anger. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the group. I don't care. In this platoon, we judge people by what they do when it counts, not by their job title or what they look like in uniform. He walked over to the nervous specialist. What's your name? Specialist Morrison, Staff Sergeant, the kid stammered. You scared, Morrison? Yes, Staff Sergeant, the kid admitted, to his credit. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Greer's expression softened almost imperceptibly. But fear doesn't define you. Your actions do. You do your job with competence and integrity, and you'll have my respect and my protection. You understand? Yes, Staff Sergeant, Morrison said, standing a little straighter. Greer nodded and stepped back, addressing the entire group again. I learned something important in these mountains. I learned it from someone who taught me more in 4 days than I'd learned in 8 years of service. He paused, the memory vivid and sharp. I learned that the person who saves your life might not look like what you expect. They might not talk like you, act like you, or come from the same background as you. But if you're too busy judging them to see their value, then you're the weak link. You're the liability. Private Russo, now a specialist himself and sitting in the front row, nodded slowly. He remembered. They all remembered. So here's how we do things, Greer continued. We train hard, we stay sharp, and we take care of each other. All of each other. Because when the bullets start flying, rank and background don't mean shit. The only thing that matters is whether you can count on the person next to you. He looked each of them in the eye. And they need to know they can count on you. Understood? Yes, Staff Sergeant, the group responded in unison. Outstanding. Dismissed. As the new arrivals filed out, Rousseau lingered behind. He walked up to Greer, a question in his eyes. You ever hear from her, Staff Sergeant? Rousseau asked quietly. Greer shook his head. No. People like that, they don't stay in touch. They move through your life like ghosts, change everything, and disappear. He looked out the window at the mountains that had nearly killed them all. But I think about her every day. Wonder where she is, what mission she's on, whether she's safe. Think we'll ever see her again? Greer smiled, a rare, genuine expression. I hope not, because if we see her again, it means the world's gone so far to hell that they need to send legends to fix it. He clapped Rousseau on the shoulder. But if we do, I'll make damn sure I'm worthy of the second chance she gave me. Rousseau nodded, understanding completely. Hua, Staff Sergeant. Hua. Somewhere over the Atlantic. Major Elena Voss sat in the cargo bay of a C-17, surrounded by pallets and equipment, flying toward another assignment in another forgotten corner of the world. She wore civilian clothes now. Jeans, a plain black jacket, hiking boots, though her rifle case sat beside her, as familiar as an old friend. She pulled out a small, battered notebook and flipped to a page filled with names, locations, dates. Each entry represented an assignment, a mission, a life changed or saved. She found the most recent entry, FOB Iron Ridge, 3rd Platoon, Charlie Company, Staff Sergeant M. Greer. Mission successful. Assessment, redeemable. Below it, she added a single word. Redeemed. She closed the notebook and slipped it back into her jacket. Outside the aircraft, the world was dark, the ocean below invisible. But somewhere ahead, dawn was waiting. There were always more missions. More mountains to climb, more battles to fight. More people who needed someone to believe in them when no one else would. And she would be there, in the shadows and the dust, wearing whatever rank or disguise the mission required, doing the work that legends were made of. Because that's what ghosts did. They haunted the places where hope was thin and courage was tested. And they reminded people, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, that strength came in unexpected forms. The dust never lied. It settled on everyone equally, regardless of rank or title. And underneath it all, stripped of pretense and pride, everyone was just trying to survive another day. Some people, though, people like Elena Voss, did more than survive. They made sure others could too. And that, in the end, was the only mission that truly mattered.